Finance plays a lot of different roles in the organization, and one of the key roles of finance is to be an operator, to really operate effectively and cost efficiently. I think that with what's going on with the downturn right now, finance is going to need to challenge itself even further to become leaner and to focus on areas where finance can do the same activities it does today, but with less resources and less investment. I think for the last 6 or 7 years, finance has had the benefit of being able to invest an awful lot in itself and really take advantage of the opportunities to mitigate risk that came out of Sarbanes-Oxley. And I think now with the downturn, finance is going to need to continue to challenge itself and its operating model to find ways to basically become a little bit leaner. CFOs have a lot of responsibilities, but number one, I think they need to always be the alter ego to the business. When everything is wonderful and there's a bubble economy going on, I think it's CFOs who need to keep the business grounded. Alternatively, when the economy is in a little bit of a slowdown or a big slowdown like it is today, I think the CFOs have a responsibility to actually continue to challenge the business to invest when the right investments are out there for high ROI activities. And I think it's the CFO's responsibility to constantly challenge the business to really think differently. And so when everyone wants to bunker down in the hills and focus on where the different things are happening, it's the CFOs who really need to push and say, well, we need to invest. It's time to still invest. Counterparty risk is one of the areas of risk that I think traditionally a lot of CFOs and finance organizations didn't necessarily factor in all that high to their risk formula. I think over the last 6 months, we've now seen the downside of counterparty risk, and the amount of due diligence that's going to be done by finance organizations and CFOs really has increased significantly and is going to need to continue to increase. Due diligence is important, and counterparty risk is just one of those areas that traditionally just wasn't really a big factor, but now it is. The liquidity crisis is a challenge that CFOs have today that really there's two areas I think they need to be focusing on. Number one, banking relationships. The CFOs, I think, took those for granted over the years and now are going to need to make sure they've got very secure banking relationships and have a high number of them as well, and that's going to become even more important. Secondly, we think CFOs are going to now be needing to educate their business around thinking about cash, not just earnings. And this is a liquidity issue at the most basic level. What's happened in most companies today, their management reporting processes and all their management systems are really around earnings per share. Everything the business does is all about earnings. There's a tremendous opportunity for CFOs to really help educate the business that it's not just about earnings, but about good old-fashioned cash and the opportunities to accelerate specific depreciation, for example, that may not reduce effective tax rates, but in fact helps bring cash in the door. And those are the kinds of things that CFOs can really drive just a good education and a different level of thinking for the business. There's a couple things that are happening that I think CFOs need to be focusing on. First of all, CFOs today need to be able to distinguish between costs in the business that are truly marginal in nature and that really arose because of what's happened in the business world the last 5 years and investments that were made that aren't necessarily costs that are really necessary for where things are today, versus the most critical expenditures and the critical investments that really make the most sense. And CFOs are typically in the best position, they're independent to be able to tell the difference between the kinds of costs that are there. Secondly, any costs that today are currently fixed costs that really aren't in a position of the variability, CFOs are finding ways to turn those into somewhat of a variable cost. And some examples of that, meaning certain activities that may be a competency that the business owns, may be in a position to look at outsourcing to a third party. For example, CFOs are in a wonderful spot to really be able to tell the difference and be able to distinguish and help the rest of the business figure out where those costs can be taken out the right way. finance always needs to be balancing service delivery with cost. That's a fundamental premise of a finance organization. I think today CFOs are really responsible for generally making sure costs are being spent correctly across the whole business. They need to then lead by example. And to lead by example, CFOs need to make sure that they've got their own finance organization's house in order and are focusing on the operating model that balances the service delivery around financial planning and management reporting and forecasting with cost and doing the transactional activities in the most cost-effective way possible. The two are not necessarily challenges for each other, but they're both a perspective that finance needs to continue to be able to push on itself. So balancing service delivery, you still need to be able to serve the business, be the right decision support, be the right business partner, but at what price? At what level of concierge type of services does the finance organization need to be serving the business? And can that concierge level be dropped a little bit? Can demand be reduced for finance a little bit in the current environment we're in? And that's what the CFOs constantly needs to be assessing.